Hello, this is a video for the 6.02 lesson, Reaganomics. The most immediate challenge Reagan faced as a new president was the economic crisis. His plans for dealing with the crisis including cutting taxes to jumpstart the economy, increasing interest rates to tame inflation, and balancing the budget by cutting spending on social programs. Reaganomics, as the president's plan came to be called, based on a theory of supply-side economics, had mixed results. Goals for this lesson: explain the theory of supply-side economics and the arguments for and against it, analyze the economic outcomes of Reagan's budget plan, and recognize Sandra Day O'Connor as the first woman to become a Supreme Court justice. Go to Lesson Resources, you have your reading guide, lesson answer key, and then there's also an extra Sandra Day O'Connor sheet that we'll be using today in the lesson. Starting out with reading pages 898 through 903. So Reaganomics. Well, actually, before I begin Reaganomics, let's read this insert, An Attempted Assassination. On March 30th, 1981, only months into the Reagan presidency, a deranged 25-year-old named John Hinckley Jr. opened fire on Reagan and his aides as they left the Washington Hilton Hotel after a speech. Within 10 seconds, Hinckley fired 6 shots at close range, hitting Reagan's press secretary, a Washington, D.C. police officer, a Secret Service agent, and Reagan himself. Reagan was rushed to George Washington University Hospital, where doctors discovered a bullet in his left lung, an inch from his heart. As he was prepped for emergency surgery, Reagan told the medical staff, "I hope you're all Republicans." A surgeon replied, "Today, Mr. President, we're all Republicans." Reagan maintained good humor throughout his recovery. After the surgery, he told his wife, Nancy, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Americans were impressed with Reagan's courage and high spirits. Now Reaganomics. As Reagan began his presidency, the most immediate challenge he faced was the economic crisis. The president quickly outlined his plan. He proposed to cut taxes to jumpstart the economy, to tame inflation with high interest rates, to balance the budget through spending cuts to social programs, and to increase the defense budget to improve America's military standing. Supply-side economics. Reagan proposed to slash income taxes by 30% over 3 years. He hoped that if citizens were able to keep more of their income, they would boost the economy by spending some of their extra money or by investing it or starting new businesses. Reagan argued that cutting taxes would stimulate the economy and create new jobs. More people with jobs would mean more people paying taxes, which Reagan hoped would make up for the loss of revenue from the lower tax rates. Economists called Reagan's theory supply-side economics because it encouraged growth in the supply of goods and services. Congress proceeded to cut income taxes, phasing in reductions over 3 years. Many middle-class families enjoyed some tax relief. The wealthiest Americans received the largest reductions in their tax rates. In 1980, the tax rate for the wealthiest Americans had leveled off at 70%. But in 1981, the rate was cut to 50%, and by 1988, Reagan had slashed the top tax rate to 33%. Conservative economists argued that benefits to the wealthy would eventually make their way down to the lower income brackets, which led Reagan's critics to call his plan trickle-down economics. More for defense, less for social programs. Reagan felt that the United States had grown timid in world affairs since the Vietnam War, and the defense budget reflected the nation's self-doubt. Reagan asked the Joint Chiefs of Staff what they required to ensure America's military superiority. He told them, "You spend what you need." During Reagan's first term, the annual military spending jumped from $157 billion in 1981 to $227 billion in 1984, a 44% increase. During Reagan's 2 terms, over a quarter of total federal spending went to defense. To pay for higher defense spending, some other expenses would have to be pruned in an attempt to balance the budget. Reagan targeted social welfare programs. In proposing cuts to social programs, Reagan had to compromise with Congress. Even though Republicans controlled the Senate from 1981 to 1987, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives by large majorities during Reagan's 2 terms in office, 1981 through 89. The president agreed to preserve the most expensive programs, Social Security and Medicare. In turn, in 1981, Congress cut about $41 billion from social assistance programs. Critics charged that the funding cuts to these programs, including jobs programs, food stamps, school lunches, and housing subsidies, hurt the poor. Economic revival at a cost. Reaganomics, as the president's plan came to be called, ran into initial difficulties. With the Federal Reserve Board maintaining higher interest rates to keep inflation in check, the economy dipped into a recession. In 1982, unemployment rose to over 10%, the highest level since the Depression. After the 1982 recession, the American economy bounced back as inflation rates went down, oil prices dropped, and Reagan's tax cuts stimulated spending and investment. Gross domestic product increased by 4% a year, spurring the creation of hundreds of thousands of new businesses and millions of new jobs. By 1988, median family income rose about 12%, and the stock market hit new heights. Along with this growing prosperity, however, came inequality. In 1988, the richest 1% of the population held 15% of America's wealth, while 20% of American children lived below the poverty line. The economic revival was also accompanied by huge budget deficits. This was because government spending in the military buildup and on social programs was greater than the amount of tax money collected. There is no way around the math. The more spending than income leads to a deficit. During Reagan's 2 terms, the national debt nearly tripled, reaching $2.7 trillion by the time he left office. In his first inaugural address in 1981, Reagan had warned, "For decades we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present." I'll keep going there. To continue this long trend is to guarantee tremendous social, cultural, and political and economic upheavals. For whatever reasons, the president did not heed his own warnings. Reagan's willingness to accept huge budget deficits marked a break from previous Republican Party. Eisenhower, for example, had firmly demanded a balanced budget. Now let's go back here a few pages to go over some of the things we skipped. Okay, let's look, for example, at the poverty line. The poverty line is a term often used for the minimal level of income needed to maintain an adequate standard of living. In the United States, the Office of Management and Budget defines the poverty line. For example, according to the 2008 guidelines, a family of 4 in the continental United States with an income of less than $21,200 fall below the poverty line. And this picture here, emphasizing his pledge to cut taxes, President Reagan, with New Jersey Governor Thomas Kean, holds a huge federal income tax form stamped with the no symbol. And these graphs on this page here talks about deficits, debts, and big numbers. The national debt is the amount of money owed by the federal government as annual deficits accumulate. When the government spends more than it takes in, it borrows money to cover the deficit. This borrowing is done mainly by selling various kinds of government bonds, treasury bills, and notes to individuals, banks, businesses, foreign governments, and other entities that earn interest on the money that lend to the government. As the debt increases, that is, as the government owes more and more money, the amount the government owes lenders in interest also increases and also becomes a larger portion of future government spending. Federal budgets deal in large quantities, millions, billions, and trillions. These big numbers can sometimes seem abstract, just so many zeros in a row. But what does it mean for a deficit to go from millions to trillions? In 1989, John Allen Paulos, a mathematician, offered some comparisons to help make sense of large quantities. 1 million seconds add up to about 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds adds up to 32 years, and 1 trillion seconds almost 32,000 years. And these are just some graphs to show the growing national debt and the federal deficit spending from 1973 to 1992. Okay, the PATCO strike, Reagan and labor. In the summer of 1981, the Reagan administration received troubling news. The Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, was threatening to strike. The union represented the men and women who staffed the nation's airport control towers and radar centers. Their work was extremely stressful, and they were demanding a 100% raise in pay. Because the controllers were federal employees, the wage increase, totaling $700 million, will come out of the federal budget, which Reagan had vowed to cut. Reagan offered PATCO an 11% raise, but the union leaders refused it. On August 3rd, 70% of the 17,000 controllers walked off their jobs. Without controllers, the country's air traffic would grind to a standstill. Even more troubling, foreign bombers could easily breach the country's unmonitored airspace and threaten national security. During negotiations, Reagan had warned PATCO that he would not tolerate a strike. Strikes by federal employees were against the law, and as part of their employment, the controllers had each signed an agreement swearing not to strike. Reagan gave the controllers 48 hours to return to work. He said that those who did not return would be fired. The PACO leaders assumed Reagan was bluffing. The nation's economy depended on air traffic to transport products and travelers, and the president couldn't possibly do without the employees who made it run. When the 48-hour deadline came, less than one-third of the controllers had returned to their jobs. The other 70%, about 11,000 workers, were fired. Reagan replaced them with military controllers until more civilians could be trained. Within 10 days, commercial and government flights were running close to their normal schedule. Reagan's handling of the strike made a strong impression on his countrymen and foreign leaders. Confronting the first national emergency, he had shown himself to be firm and decisive. Reagan later described the strike as an important juncture for our new administration. I think it convinced people who might have thought otherwise that I meant what I said. Reagan's stand against the air traffic controllers union also signaled a shift in federal policy. Democratic administrations who courted union voters had been friendly to labor. Reagan's Labor Department would be friendlier toward industry. The failure of the air traffic controller strike was part of the larger trend in the decline of labor's power. The number of large-scale strikes per year sank from 187 in 1980 to 40 in 1988. Between 1975 and 1987, union membership fell more than 30%, partly due to larger changes in the American economy. Industrial and manufacturing jobs, which were union strongholds, were on the decline. Service jobs, everything from restaurant, hotel to finance and insurance, were on the rise, but relatively few service workers belonged to unions. And here's just a picture of the air traffic strike. Deregulating America. In his first inaugural address, Reagan emphasized that he would carry through with a promise he had made repeatedly during his campaign, to curb what he saw as the unnecessary and excessive growth of government. He stated, "It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment. Government," he emphasized, "is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem." In the view of Reagan and other conservatives, one way that government had become the problem was by enacting too many regulations. Many federal regulations served important purposes. For example, to prevent monopolies, ensure the safety of the consumer, and protect the environment. But by 1980, the Federal Register, the official listing of rules, proposals, government agency activities, and executive orders, contained 87,000 pages of regulations. Reagan trimmed some 40,000 pages from the Federal Register. He also cut the budgets of many agencies charged with enforcing federal regulations. As some agencies, for example the Environmental Protection Agency and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Reagan appointed administrators whose goal was to push for further deregulation. And by reducing government regulation of private enterprise, Reagan intended to benefit entrepreneurs and consumers. In some cases, deregulation did bring clear benefits. One of Reagan's first acts as president was to issue an executive order eliminating regulations controlling the price of oil and gasoline. Although it was a pointless charge that prices would go up, they went down. Reagan pushed ahead with deregulation of the airline industry, a process initiated by Jimmy Carter. The result was increased competition that led to lower ticket prices. Other acts of deregulation produced mixed results. Reagan greatly scaled back regulations on the automobile industry. He overturned or delayed rulings that would give required lower emission of pollutants, higher fuel efficiency, and stricter safety standards for tires and passenger restraints. The result was more affordable cars for the consumer, but cars that polluted more, used more gas, and were not as safe as they could have been if the regulations had been enacted. Some acts of deregulation generated controversy. Reagan's Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, opened millions of acres of public land for businesses to undertake logging, mining, and oil drilling. Watt encouraged companies to mine more, drill more, cut more timber. Watt's push for development over preservation, along with Reagan's budget cuts at the Environmental Protection Agency, angered many environmentalists. Reagan also relaxed the rules governing savings and loan institutions, often called S&Ls. Many S&Ls were losing money at the time. The deregulation helped them become more competitive by allowing them to act more like banks, for example by issuing credit cards or investing in real estate. With the regulations lifted, some savings and loan executives made highly speculative investments that earned them steep profits but soon crashed. Many S&Ls made very risky business loans that went bad when real estate values declined and borrowers failed to repay. By 1989, hundreds of S&Ls had gone bankrupt. In this case, deregulation cost American taxpayers a great deal. The federal government, which had insured deposits at the collapsed S&Ls, ended up paying more than $100 billion. All right, let's go back here and look about this inset. The U.S. federal government holds and manages millions of acres of land designated as public land. Much of this public land, such as national parks and forests, is open for recreational use. Some is protected from private and set aside for conservation. The government can allow private development of natural resources on public land, such as by allowing a selective logging in a national forest. To what extent should public lands be open for private use and development? This question led to heated debate among the Reagan administration. And I'm going to run out of time to finish reading it, so please go through on your own, finish reading this, and we'll start the next video with the rest of the lesson.